You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm your host for BioTalk, and we basically interview very interesting people in the biohealth capital region, nationally, and also global leaders within the biohealth industry. And we have somebody within our own backyard today from the state of Maryland who's affiliated with TEDCO, but runs a very important program in conjunction with TEDCO. And we have Dr. Ruchika Nijhara, who's the executive director for the Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund, with us today to join BioTalk. Ruchika, welcome to BioTalk.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you for inviting me. And I am glad that I'm here with you today.
It's taken us a long time to coordinate the right date for this, but finally we're here, and it's a good timing because you're going to have some news for the listeners to talk about later, how they can get involved in your program. But before we talk about that, we have to introduce what your program is and introduce you to the listeners. And there's no better way than rather than me to introduce you than to you to do it for yourself, because you know a lot more about your background than I do. So Ruchika, take it away and give us, our listeners, a little background on how you got to where you are today.
Well, Rich, yes, this is a very timely meeting or interview or podcast, however you want to call this. But to start with my introduction, so I'm Executive Director of Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund, and it's been 6 exciting months in this role now. Prior to being here, I served as the Vice President of Georgetown University Office of Technology Commercialization, where I was overseeing all projects of all aspects of technology development and commercialization, including the management and commercialization of intellectual property assets at the university, as well as its commercialization and forming and working with new companies that got spin-off from university. I was there for a long time, 15 years. And before being at Georgetown, I was part of a team at University of Maryland, Baltimore, working with the Office of Technology Transfer. Again, similar roles, of course, looking at intellectual property protection and management, commercialization, collaborating with academic researchers at Maryland, University of Maryland, Baltimore specifically, and building and growing the spin-off companies that were affiliated with the university. And in both these roles, I feel privileged that I had the opportunity to work with the brilliant minds and entrepreneurs and investors and companies to promote the commercialization of those early but innovative technologies for a wide range of diseases. So it wasn't like I was working on a particular disease area. It was anything and everything that was innovative. So that was exciting. My academic journey actually started in India, New Delhi, where from the very get-go, I had interest in science generally. So I started my PhD in biochemistry from University of Delhi. That's where I did my master's in biochemistry as well. And then I came to NIH, NCI particularly, to do my postdoc. And that was in the field of cell biology and immunology. That journey also brought me to Office of Technology Transfer at NIH, where I gained really valuable experience in technology transfer. And that's the biggest office in the world as it relates to commercialization of innovative technologies.
Were you working with Mark Rohrbach there?
Yes, he was leading the office at the time, with Steve Ferguson in particular.
Steve Ferguson too, sure, yeah.
Being in that office, learning the ropes, understanding what it takes really helped me to appreciate what it takes to bring those lab discoveries to become a product. That experience definitely helped. And then I did my MBA at the University of Maryland to really solidify and get an academic degree to support my career. So over the years, being in the field of this technology transfer or commercialization, my expertise became how to have partnership between academia and industry. What is needed to have IP protected? What are the inventions? How do you do technology development? And how technology development leads to economic development. So these were all something of these expertise and skills I gained over years. And also, very importantly, a deep understanding of the challenges that researchers really, or how to translate their scientific discoveries to become something that's practical and useful to impact people's life.
Perfect background to prepare you for what you're doing today. And the listeners can't see you, Dr. Nijhara, but basically with the depth of your background, I can't believe you look too young to have all of that broad resume that you have behind you.
Oh, well, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. But yes, it took years. It's over 2 decades of experience, I would say, in tech transfer field, as we call it, or moving those discoveries from lab to market.
Well, you've had some great mentors working with Steve Ferguson and Mark Rohrbach at the office there, and then also Jim Hughes and what they were building at the University of Maryland and what it's become today. So you've been involved in 2 extremely successful programs to prepare you for what you're doing today, and then going to Georgetown, 15 years. I can't believe you spent 15 years at Georgetown. We're just starting to engage with them now, and unfortunately you've left, but I'm starting to work with Tatiana, who is the new head of tech transfer at Georgetown, and I'm sure you built a great foundation for her to take over after you've left.
And believe it or not, Rich, yes, I mean, look, having a diverse experience, doing research in 2 different continents, having to work in a public university, state institution, and of course, a private research institution, it just has diversified my experience and really has solidified my experience in terms of how we can make the system more innovative. Having to work in Maryland, where, I saw that whole ecosystem being there and, you were just enhancing it, to coming to Georgetown, where we were secluded essentially. When I was leaving, I started working with TEDCO to bring because most of the startups at Georgetown University were either in Virginia or in Maryland, but there wasn't that ecosystem. So I started building on those initiatives that would connect us all. And Rich, honestly, you're doing great building this community together. So keep doing what you're doing. It was exciting when I was told about this position at MSCRF. This was a perfect opportunity to go back. While I enjoyed what I did at Georgetown and the challenges that existed there and coming out ways to solve those challenges, it was just when I saw this opportunity, it was just so hard to say no.
Well, with your background, it's a natural transition to do what you're doing today. And then you're running your own program too, which is very, very good. You have the experience in building and leading programs. And this is a very important program to the state of Maryland and to TEDCO. So congratulations with your first 6 months at MSCRF. I know you're going to be able to build this just like you build the other programs you've been affiliated with. So the listeners are dying to hear what the Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund does. So, and I know after 6 months, you're an expert in it and nobody knows more about it than you do right now. So let's talk about what you do at the MSCRF.
So MSCRF is Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund. A lot of people confuse it with foundations. No, it's a fund. It's a state-driven initiative that is dedicated to expediting cutting-edge stem cell research that drives healthcare and have positive impact on human lives. So it was, in terms of the fund is almost now 16 years old. It was in 2006 during Maryland General Assembly session when the Maryland governor and the Maryland General Assembly enacted Maryland Stem Cell Act of 2006 to help support stem cell research due to the fact that there was very limited funding, especially federal funding, to support that kind of work. And that's how the fund was created, what we call as Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund. The fund had a very clear and a visionary mission, which was, again, to fund early stage or any research that's directed to stem cell and regenerative medicine to help those initial discoveries or projects get developed and become products to improve patients' life. In fact, I take pride in saying that Maryland was one of the few states that actually realized the potential of stem cell research and supported through this fund the development of those innovative ideas and novel discoveries, many of which today are in clinical development. And until today, the state, Maryland governor, and legislatures have supported this fund. Every year, this fund has get an appropriation from the state, and it's been 16 years, and that commitment is still there. In fact, so we go by fiscal year to fiscal year. We are right now in fiscal year 24. So I'm talking about last year fiscal year, when the fund actually more than doubled to $20.5 million, thanks to Governor Moore and his administration that he kept the budget same for this year. So I have $20.5 million to spend and give awards. And today, MSCRF has given awards over $200 million with over 600 different technologies from research institutions and businesses. Just in last fiscal year 23, we had allocated $17 million towards funding to 41 different scientists from companies, from research institutions. I feel definitely grateful that we have the support of Governor. Any funding that comes through has really shown its impact in one way or the other.
Yeah, I think it's great to see that the track record the fund has had, because it's rare that you see growth like this, having gone through probably now 3 or 4 different administrations, as well as multiple assemblies on an annual basis, and to see the growth grow to where you are today is generally unusual, because they generally flatten out or else priorities change within different administrations. So programs like this can only be successful when you have continuity and you can build year after year. And I think that's one of the most important things you said, Ruchika, is that you've had $200 million invested, but it's been a 16-year-old period, and there is predictability and sustainability of the program, which has come to that, which makes it easier for you as the leader of the fund to continue to lead it from year to year basis. So let's talk a little bit about some of the parameters around the fund right now. So first of all, who's eligible to apply for the fund? What kind of awards can people get? What's the size of the different awards that people can get? And can people get multiple awards? If they do good work with maybe the first grant that they might get, can they reapply for additional awards in the program?
I am glad you're giving me this chance to talk about the programs. All the questions you're asking, I'm dying to respond, because, this is what I want my listeners to hear. So let me start with this. When we started in 2007, we had 3 programs, and over time we've really expanded. Now we have 7 programs. We've broad spectrum of stem cell scientists, from young postdoctoral fellows who are just in the lab getting trained, to faculty who are just new and developing and building their career, to established scientists, either in research institutions or in companies. So gamut of people we fund. Different programs have different eligibility criteria. All that information is on our website, but I'll quickly go through it just so that people know as to, where they fit in that bucket. In terms of the technologies we fund anything and everything that relates to stem cell and regenerative medicine, be it a research tool, be it diagnostic kit, be it just a therapy, or anything that enables the research in stem cell field. We funded gamut of diseases, from the most prevalent in Maryland, like diabetes and heart disease and arthritis and stroke, to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and rare diseases. So there's a gamut so we are disease agnostic as it relates to our funding. In terms of the program, we fund from very, very early projects to the projects that need de-risking to get into clinical development, or the projects that are in clinical development, or the projects that are ready to be manufactured, or, when they are, especially in cell therapy field, where manufacturing is such a big challenge. The earlier you start thinking about it and the earlier you start optimizing your processes, the better it is. So we fund the whole gamut of these different stages of development. So there are 7 programs. There is one postdoctoral fellowship program. Most of the funds are for 2 years, but it depends, except for the commercialization grant, which is for a year. Most of the projects that we fund for are for the period of 2 years. The discovery projects are for very, very, very early stage funding, early stage of development where you just have an innovative idea. You don't know whether it's going to work, but you see the idea seems feasible to you. And so we give around close to $350,000 for 2 years for you to develop and generate data. So we come in so early when even sometimes federal agencies don't want to support that kind of work. And that's for academic researchers. Then we have also a program called Launch, where faculty, new or established, who haven't worked with stem cell, but they want to explore that field because now the direction they have been taking in developing their therapeutics or diagnostics requires stem cell work, or they are new to stem cell field and they want to establish themselves, and that program is specifically for them. Then we have validation, where there is the academic PIs who have IP and they want to de-risk the technology. And that's where I want to talk about a new initiative we have. Don't let me forget, Rich. Then there is commercialization. So commercialization, clinical, and manufacturing. These are the 3 programs that are available to companies. We definitely want to promote formation of new companies. So some of the programs are catered towards that. But also we want to help established companies grow and retain talent in Maryland. So clinical trial funding is and that's our only program. That's our only program where the company doesn't have to be a Maryland. It could be a company outside of Maryland. They can access this funding provided they have a clinical site in Maryland. So that's the hook. But of course, we'll only cover for the expenses in the state of Maryland as it relates to that clinical site. But that's a big help. In this field, these clinical trials are really expensive. So whatever help you can get, I'm sure companies would appreciate it. So that's our clinical. Manufacturing is where we provide and so clinical is $1 million with a requirement for non-state matching fund. Manufacturing is same, but it is for helping the companies build their manufacturing infrastructure processes. And that's one of our newest programs that we launched in last year. And we got good feedback from companies. We had 3 awardees from the last cycle. And so we'll see how that works. But it was very well received and it was much needed program to help our companies in Maryland. And then there is venture all 7. So the range typically, with the exception of postdoctoral fellowship, which is $130,000, which I believe is significant. As a postdoc, I would have loved to get that grant. Clinical and manufacturing is $1 million, and the others are close to $200,000 to $400,000.
That's okay, though, but it's a comprehensive portfolio of programs that almost covers the whole life cycle of research, from very early stage academics who are just exploring all the way to clinical trials and manufacturing. So it's rare that you have the continuity of the programs that can take you through that whole life cycle within a specific research category. So I compliment the state of Maryland and the MSCRF fund for having that vision to do that. So a couple more questions related to the programs in the fund. Who makes the decision on who gets funded? What's the decision-making process? And then also, what are the different funding cycles throughout the year when people can apply?
You're asking all the right questions that I want my listeners to hear. There are 2 funding cycles in any fiscal year. We just completed one. So there's one in summer and one in winter. So the one that's coming up is we would have RFA being rolled out in next couple of days. The submission deadline for that cycle is going to be January 22nd, 2024. And the next one will be in summer. In terms of the process, so once the applications, we do provide guidance to applicants if they really want to know how they should approach, what's really is looked into when the applications are evaluated. All that guidance I'm happy to provide to the applicants before they submit. But once the application is submitted, so there is 3 rounds of evaluation or review. The review happens by experts who are not Marylanders, so they have no conflict. They go through all the projects are looked for their scientific merit, feasibility, and the impact. They score the applications, and then based on the recommendations that's made by peer review meeting, Maryland Stem Cell Commission makes the final decision to fund the projects, looking into considerations like what's the impact, does it fit, what's the scientific merit, and does it fit and align with the goals that MSCRF has. The process is very transparent, is very fair. The preference is always to award projects that have strong science and strong commercial feasibility. For the projects that are early in their stages of development, like discovery, it's too hard to really anticipate what the commercial potential would be. So those projects are evaluated on their scientific merit. And as I said, these projects, when these applications don't need to even have data. So that's the idea, is to bring those innovative ideas into a stage where now there is data to support it.
And you mentioned the commission makes the final decision. I would imagine that's the MSCRF commission, correct? The Stem Cell Commission.
So our commission is independent commission. And you rightly mentioned, Rich, in the beginning, we are affiliated with TEDCO, but we have our own commission, and TEDCO administers our fund. So the commission makes the final determination in terms of which applications get funded. Some by state, some by each of the institutions like Hopkins, University of Maryland. So there's we have bioethicists. We're working in this field where ethics is an important consideration. So very diverse in terms of the commission we have.
And then you're talking about cycles, and you didn't want me to forget to remind you of a new program that's coming out in the next couple of weeks with a new initiative. So why don't we talk about that now, and we'll remind the listeners at the end again about this new program.
Absolutely. So one of the important things, as I said, my expertise is to foster an innovative ecosystem. Having to miss that for 15 years and having to see what it is in Maryland, I wanted to enhance that. And this was the 2 new initiatives we have are in spirit of making a deliberate effort to bring industry and academia closer in advancing the field. So for the 2 programs I mentioned, one is validation. So validation program is for academic researchers where there is an existing intellectual property, and the next step is to further de-risk so that there is a commercial partner who can do the clinical development and commercialize the IP. So in that validation program, we put a 2-tier funding. So it is $250,000 if an academic researcher applies for this funding and there is no interest from a commercial partner to take it forward. However, if the tech transfer office tell us that they have a serious commercial partner who's interested in developing this further, the applicant gets access to additional $100,000 to work with this commercial partner. If it's a Maryland-based company, then the Maryland-based company can use that $100,000 to further advance that project. If it's a company outside of Maryland, the company can allow the academic inventor on that project to further develop the technology. Or it could be a Maryland-based CRO who is doing an IND enabling studies that is needed as a next step. So you get access to additional $100,000 if you have that kind of relationship with a commercial entity. So that's like, okay, find a partner. And it is a way to incentivize tech transfer offices to tell their potential partners. You know, when I was in tech transfer office, I always used to say, you as a licensee or a potential licensee, why don't you sponsor some research in the inventor lab? And typically the companies would have to pay that sponsored research from their own pocket. This kind of initiative now incentivize the companies to allow more research in the inventor labs, because most of the time the inventor has all these assays running. They know how to do some of the work and they're limited by funding most of the time. So that's one. The other initiative on the flip side is giving access to additional $100,000 to a company who gets funding through our commercialization program if they find an academic partner in Maryland. So from $400,000, they would get actually $500,000 if they have an academic partner to work with on that project. So that's what I said, having to be in tech transfer office, having to know what the challenges each side face. This was an attempt to bring these two communities together.
That's when you bring a new person into a program, sometimes you identify new gaps that need to be addressed. So I would imagine, and we're talking to Dr. Ruchika Nijhara, the head of the Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund, that when you came in, you basically identified there might be some additional programs that could be developed to address these gaps. And that's what these new initiatives are.
Correct. More to come.
More to come. Yeah. So by the time we end this podcast, we're going to let people understand how they can learn more about this through your website and other information you're going to be publishing related to these new initiatives. But in the meantime, there's been over 200 million invested, 600 different types of technologies and programs. Why don't you talk about a few of what you'd classify some of the success stories that have come out of this program?
Absolutely. It's exciting. But you mentioned that, and I didn't touch upon that before, was that how many times can you get funded? It is only one time. This is, I think, the perfect time to talk about that. Except for our launch program, which is only for the people who are first timers in stem cell, all other programs would allow you to come and get repeated funding as long as you're moving the project forward. Can't talk about all the programs which actually are awardees that started at the discovery stage, and now either they are in the validation stage or clinical stage. But just to name a few, and companies in Maryland, Teradaptive, Syraxis, and I think they have come to you and you have them on your podcast. These companies started at very early stage. They were, for example, one of the companies that we just funded in the first round of fiscal year 24 is a university spinoff from University of Maryland. The PI was in the lab. There was an intellectual property. So we funded them as a postdoc. Then they got into, and this is the company Secretome. They were called Neoprint before, but they changed their name just to reflect what they were doing. So we funded them as postdoc. Then they spin off the company. They got discovery grants. Then they got validation grants, commercialization grant, and then they got two commercialization grants. And they're pretty close to filing their IND next year. Teradaptive, similar case where Secretome works in the field of heart diseases. Teradaptive they're using stem cell-based implants for the soft tissue loss. Syraxis also got commercialization grant. And now not only these companies have successfully raised funds based on the funding provided to them, but they also are progressing their science towards closer to becoming a product. So for Syraxis, they raised up to 50 million. Teradaptive raised close to 30 million recently. And both of these companies will be soon starting their clinical trial in the next year. So these are some of the examples that from industry help found companies, but help support these spin-offs and help them grow, but also establish companies like Rooster Bio or ReproCell, Maxite. These were all our awardees. ReproCell is actually selling these iPS cells. Rooster Bio is providing research community these mesenchymal stem cells and exosomes. So there's progress in all directions. We just recently funded FISIN, and that's going to be for making tools available to research community in stem cell field. From academia, we funded technologies, researchers when they had no funding, and now they have gotten repeated funding from NIH and other sources because they were able to generate that data that helped them provide those additional grants. We funded postdocs who actually now have launched their own careers as independent PIs nationally. I mean, some in Maryland, some elsewhere. I mean, I'm not even going to talk about the publications that came out of work. That's just countless. But in spinning companies that are just starting, there's so much to talk about in terms of what we consider as success. But it would not have been possible without the state and governor and the legislators to be behind us and give us that chance to provide that consistent funding to our companies and to our academic researchers.
And basically, what you're also talking about is that this doesn't happen overnight. The research that they're doing in stem cells or any other major categories takes a lot of time, sometimes decade. And the nice thing about your program is you've been around, as you say now, 16 years. You have the ability to follow the successes with these companies or researchers, whether it's academic or industry. And if they're continuing to do well, you have the ability to continue to fund them as they continue to progress. So that's very unusual with the program. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit with you on, Ruchika, is partners, having strategic partners that can help support you so that you're not funding these initiatives by yourself, and you have other people that can either provide support with resources or laboratory support or commercial support, like TEDCO. I mean, TEDCO has other programs that can also be partnering with you with your stem cell program that have different purposes, but are also complementary to the companies you're working with.
Absolutely. In fact, most of the time for the businesses we fund, we are actually creating a pipeline for them to invest. And I think that's what it is, building that ecosystem. So in addition to working with TEDCO, we work with academic institutions. Of course, they are one of the stakeholders we cater to, but hospitals, healthcare institutions, because we want to make sure that those discoveries actually seamlessly transfer into patient care. Of course, biotech companies, government agencies and departments. There are a lot of resources in federal institutions in Maryland. So we're trying to build that ecosystem. A lot of spin-offs from technologies in federal institutions actually happen in Maryland. So giving them with that kind of support and infrastructure and resources, again, builds that community, builds that ecosystem. Working with economic development offices and investors. We've been talking, and again, that's sort of my background and my expertise, where helping for our startup companies, those connections, our portfolio companies, those connections where, because of the connections we have as an organization, building those connections for our portfolio companies, where they know whose door to knock and where to go in terms of regulatory guidance. And then also working with similar agencies like Alliance for Regenerative Medicine or CIRM, which is the equivalent institution in California, and having those partnerships so that we can all work towards bringing those innovative breakthroughs into becoming something that's more practically and useful as medical products or as just impacting patients' life and people's life. Investors, hospitals, I mean, it's just a wide range. And all these partnerships are so important because none of us can live in isolation. We need each other. And if we can create that kind of connectivity among us, it's good for knowledge sharing, it's good for the advancement of the field.
You know, what's interesting is we go through this discussion, your enthusiasm and passion for this program comes through. Hopefully the listeners can hear that. With this whole 6 months you have behind you now, Ruchika, what do you see as your major primary goals for the future for the fund?
I mean, 6 months is a short time. It's getting to know the system, understanding the gap. One of the things that's through this initiative that I mentioned, I want to bring that industry, academia collaboration in a more deliberate, intentional manner. But I also, again, all my goals would be in alignment with what I think is important for advancing the regenerative medicine field, improving patient outcomes, and also driving innovation. I do want to focus, and that's coming, the work has started, in making sure that we have a good representation and good engagement from underrepresented groups. So promoting diversity and inclusion is something that I really want to focus on in the near future. And having to work in 2 different continents, interacting with people from so many different backgrounds, I do believe strongly that having that diverse research community brings new perspective, and it definitely helps in bringing new innovative ideas together. So I want to make proactive attempts to engage with those underrepresented groups and have them engage in this field. So that's number one. The other thing that I really want to do is having more of community engagement, public awareness. One of the growing field is tissue reengineering or transplantation. And with that comes a lot of ethical concerns, right? This is the time when we have those tools where just recently there was a patient at University of Maryland Hospital, Baltimore, where a patient was implanted a pig heart using stem cells. Of course, the stem cells were grown in pig and then transplanted it into a human. And that patient, knock on the wood, is still surviving. And that's all, like you're taking an organ developed in pig and now putting it human. There are all those ethical questions. So if we don't have the community that's educated, of course there's a risk, but are we taking calculated risk? Are we knowing what the risk? So that kind of community engagement, that kind of public awareness is important. And I want to involve myself in making sure that we do that kind of community engagement. We do that kind of awareness and education to our community so that we all move together without slowing us down in the right direction. And the other thing is, of course, my vision is to have MSCRF be global leader in this field. And I want to attract international collaborators and engagement in advancing this field and bringing the talent and competitive edge to state of Maryland. And of course, always more money. The field that is intensive in terms of its capital needs. And some of our programs like clinical trials take a huge amount of capital, as we all know. Manufacturing, especially cell therapy-based manufacturing, has its own challenges. We are still in that nascent stage. We need to build, we need to optimize. So I will always be advocating for more money for us from the state.
A few small goals that'll be easy to achieve, Ruchika, for sure. Is there anything that you've talked a lot about the program and some of the success stories? Is there anything you want to tell the listeners that we haven't discussed that you have on your mind right now?
I would just say, look, I'm all for partnership and I'm all for there to support. So anytime any of my listeners who's listening to this podcast or has any questions regarding how we can help, how MSCRF can help, please reach out. Any help we can provide. If there is a need that you think would be useful where state could provide support, we will be your advocates. At least we'll try to be. So don't hesitate to reach out and stay tuned because our RFAs for all our several programs will be rolling out soon, for which the application submission deadline would be January 22nd. So we look forward to seeing you all applying or ask for our help.
So if they want to reach out to you, how can they reach you? Talk a little bit about your website, and maybe if you'd like, you could share your email address.
Yes, we are in the process of revamping our website, but most of the information is there. I would say reach out to me by email or through join our LinkedIn or join me through LinkedIn. We are in the process of revamping all that, but email would be the safe place. R as in Robert, NIJHARA, TEDCOMD.com.
Super easy. I want to thank Dr. Ruchika Nijhara, who's the Executive Director of the Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund, MSCRF, for being on BioTalk today. And I think we'd love to do a follow-up with you in the future, talk about some of the new programs you've created with your new leadership for the fund. And we wish you the best of luck, Ruchika.
Well, thank you, Rich. I enjoyed my conversation for you, and I appreciate this opportunity that you gave me so that I can tell about my program and what all cool things we are doing to build this community, to support this community in Maryland. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.